making your intentions known and clear. If you're really passionate, people will connect you. I believe that if you think you want to be a publicist, just try and make connections as best you can. You're never going to master anything, but don't let yourself get complacent. So I wish that I had told myself there's more opportunities, and always be curious, and always don't close any doors. Be open.
Hi, welcome to the Job Dictionary podcast. Today I'm going to be interviewing Elizabeth Sosa to learn about what it's like to be in a role of public relations manager at the Houston Ballet, a really awesome organization. And thank you so much for coming out today. Elizabeth, there's 3 questions that we always like to start with every interview with our guests. So, in your own words, could you tell me what you do, where do you live, and as a kid, what did you want to do when you grew up?
I am the public relations manager for Houston Ballet. Houston Ballet is one of the top 5 ballet companies in the country, arguably one of the most prestigious in the world. We're known for having an incredibly diverse group of dancers. We have about 60 dancers in the company. All said and told, there's about 300 people that work in various capacities at the Houston Ballet, from the musicians in the Houston Ballet Orchestra to administration to the academy. We are in Houston, Texas. And when I try and think about what I always wanted to be, I always wanted to write, and I see how I am still writing. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so Elizabeth, how long have you actually been working in this specific field?
When I was a student at University of Houston, I started interning for KUHF, which was the NPR affiliate here in Houston. And I came up through community engagement and outreach. And my director, who's also a mentor and friend, Emily Benetti, she had come from the Alley Theater as a PR manager. And so very quickly, my way of understanding communications was always about the people and connections. So I always lean more into community relations than marketing per se.
Yes.
So that would be almost 20 years ago.
Amazing. I love that. I would love to hear about just all the places you've been in that amazing career that you have. And as a dancer, I have to say, I love that you work at Houston Ballet, and I love that I get to interview you. Okay, so when you got into this career path, I know you mentioned you really did enjoy writing when you were younger. So how did you start? What made you want to go in there?
Well, having grown up during that college point of being around a major media market, Houston's a top 10, around number 8 as far as radio and television. I got to know a lot of our colleagues at other media outlets, and I became familiar and comfortable talking with different journalists, which would naturally grow into eventually pitching them about things, coverage. So I guess my first explicit public relations job was for a company that was then called Allied Integrated Marketing, that did publicity for major motion picture companies. My clients at the time were IFC, A24, Broad Green, a lot of the independents, because I like indies, but I also did the Spanish contingency for Fox. And that included outreach into the Latino communities here in Houston to get them to watch different films. So that would have been 2015. Okay. Even though that was my first PR specific title, I feel that the work that I had been doing through then was prepping me to be a publicist.
To be in that role. Awesome. Yeah. So Elizabeth, could you share with me what specific degrees or certifications you think are required to work in PR?
I studied sociology. So my BA is sociology, minor in English for writing. a lot of my peers and colleagues in the industry certainly have marketing and communications degrees. I feel, again, that my connection to humanity just made sense for studying sociology and just kind of understanding the human element, human interest stories. It really took me outside of, we don't, choose where we're born. It just connects us on a deeper level.
I agree.
So as far as what I think would be truly required, I think that if someone's naturally inclined towards wanting to work with media, creating stories and sharing them, I believe that there's a path to get into that, even if you don't have a specific communications background in school.
Yeah. Hey, I love that you mentioned that specific passion for connecting with other people and just storytelling. Could you expand a little more on how you think that is a differentiator between, that communications approach aspect of public relations that differs from, a marketing role that might have nothing to do with it?
I think of marketing as having more of a return financially.
Okay.
So I related a lot more with sales, and you have to have that return. You market something, you need people to know about it, buy tickets. I feel that my role as a publicist is to really get into who these people are, what makes them tick, how they got into it. And sometimes it's not not everyone's story is compelling, but if you talk to them long enough, you actually do find that thing that you're like, oh,
that's interesting.
Right. That human connection element. So even though I don't have a dance background, when I'm doing story mining with the dancers, maybe I find out that they grew up lower socioeconomic status and got into a program through something like Houston Ballet's Chance for Dance, which goes into different schools of a different SES, and they just fell in love. There's always something about someone that you can find that makes them interesting, and that's what I try and use to pitch. Like, this person really has come a long way, or they knew that they were going to be a dancer at 3 years old, or whatever that is.
Yeah. So it's about having that curiosity to really find what makes an individual unique within the organization and create that narrative.
It helps to be easy to talk to, I'd like to think. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm genuinely interested in learning more about people. And I think that helps disarm them so that they will be more open to just tell me who they are and how they got to where they are. And that's not just dance. I mean, when I did publicity for cinema, or even food and restaurants, hospitality, we all come to this because we're passionate about it. Or you don't really connect with someone unless they really care about what they're doing. And that's all angles.
Yes. So definitely, with that mentioned, if you specifically work at Houston Ballet, you weren't a dancer, but you still found a way to make that connection. And that's like we always say, that's what makes a good marketer, but that's definitely also what makes a good publicist and anyone that works in that aspect, because it is how you can create a story that's actually compelling. Okay, Elizabeth.
I think of it as an advantage too.
Yeah.
The fact that I didn't come from dance, because a huge part of my role, I believe, is getting people
to understand
into rhythm that wouldn't usually go to the ballet. A quick aside was, last weekend was the Houston Latino Film Festival, and I saw this movie called The Long Game, and there was a Q&A afterwards by director Julio Quintana, and the film is about golf, but he said, the thing is, I don't even really like golf, and he didn't even really like fishing, which his last movie was about. And that's what really brings it to the story, the actual story of these kids in Texas that end up winning some state championship in golf. And it really resonated with me because I love classical music. I do come from a classical world, but I never really went to the ballet. And I've just learned to really get down into their stories, and that makes all the difference.
Could you specify for me, is there any other job title that this position ever goes by? I feel like I always hear just public relations, PR specialist. Is there any other way that you can find it by?
I relate publicists as being very heavily rooted in community relations as well. Even if they're not necessarily explicitly writing press releases, a huge part of a successful publicist is going to be making those connections, putting people at ease, and always looking forward to bringing people together. So I think of publicity as very strongly tied with community relations.
When you say community relations, would that include a role, for example, like community management? Is that a part of PR or is that separate?
I'm not sure about community management. I think of community engagement, I suppose.
Okay. Awesome.
And really just a connector, but that's not usually a person's professional title.
Yes. Well, I appreciate that. It's good to have like an understanding of how, you can look for job titles to actually get into that field. Elizabeth, could you tell me about your day-to-day life in your role? What do you do? Do you mainly work in the office? Do you ever have remote days, or what's it like?
Some of my colleagues have a more hybrid remote schedule, but I am mostly here in the office, if not at the theater. And I also consider going to certain events where it's opportunistic to meet others in the field, like AMA, the American Marketing Association, or I've recently joined the Houston Cinema Art Society board as an advisory member. These kinds of things and connections are still very much, I believe, part of what makes me successful in this role. But to backtrack on what my day-to-day is like, of course, the publicist writes press releases, media advisories, and that'll go through a few drafts, of course. But the more interesting part is the story mining beforehand to get those little tidbits of how I'm going to pitch the story for coverage. So, of course, I'm going to look at who the top performers are, like head of cast. But for instance, in my short time so far at the ballet, I've implemented Spanish press releases and media advisories. Yeah. And that's expanded a lot of our Spanish-speaking reach and audiences. And so we have a few, about 5 that are from Spanish-speaking countries.
Yes.
And there is this thing where you don't want to use the same person every time. So, for instance, there's a young dancer named Alejandro Molino Leon from Spain, and he's in the core. And I've used him a couple times just because he's so, I don't want to say green, but engaging. Yes.
Yes.
So it helps to just learn everyone, as many people as you can in the company, and strategically pitch them as you learn their stories.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you're doing that work to expand the Spanish, like for the Spanish speaking community. Growing up, there was a studio in the Katy, Houston area that actually brought out, I cannot remember her name, but she is a Venezuelan ballet dancer that it was or still is at Houston Ballet. And
Karina Gonzalez.
Yes. And I took a class with her, and I remember I was like, oh my gosh. So
I forget. Angie, are you Venezolana?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
so.
yes.
So yeah, moving here and like seeing that, and part of the inclusion is super important in PR, and I love that you're doing that, and I can guarantee you the community appreciates it, especially Houston, because there's so many people in Houston that are Hispanic. Yeah. So, okay, you told me a bit about, your day-to-day tasks and just how things are. Are there specific tools or technologies that you use as a part of your job on the day-to-day?
I am incredibly lucky to work at an institution like Houston Ballet with an incredible endowment. It's a nonprofit, but it's at a higher level of any nonprofit that I'd ever worked at before. And so I feel like it's an advantage that not everyone has. So I do have a software that we use called Muckrack. There's also Meltwater, Cision out there. I believe they're like the top three, but those programs are thousands of dollars, and I never worked with one before, but it kind of just helps you find the email addresses of somebody, and
awesome.
there's tools to track who reads the release, how many times they opened it. Kind of creepy, but also useful.
Yeah.
So that is a specific I think advantage
tool
that I have that not everyone has, and so I am grateful for it.
This role that I'm in right now, I'm reaching out to a lot of professionals, and it's certainly hard to find the right person, reach out to them, find an avenue to actually reach them. So it's awesome that you have tools of this sort. And yeah, so okay, you shared that really you do enjoy that storytelling and like getting to kind of take that important aspect of every person that you highlight for Houston Ballet. What specifically then is the most exciting thing about that for you?
What's really exciting for me is the mixed repertory programs that we produce. They are one acts, and they tend to be more modern, newer choreographers, more women choreographers, people of color, and the music is also often commissioned totally brand new. And so I get really excited about those new pieces and those world premieres, especially when it brings in someone that is not the traditional ballet, classical ballet interpretation. That is definitely one of the things that I love getting to see the process of and getting to promote these new pieces.
Yeah, that's great. And that's probably like a huge pro of working in an industry that is of art. You know, it's that performance aspect that is, I love, but I am biased. So now that you've shared the most exciting, the thing you love most about it, is there anything in particular that you might happen to find more emotionally challenging or even boring of doing your day-to-day job?
The things that tend to be difficult are the disappointment when you don't get an interview secured or a review, even when you have a strong relationship with a media outlet. Maybe they can't cover for one reason or another, editor won't approve, there isn't the right match. That can be frustrating and disappointing because, of course, my job, I want to give everyone a chance to tell a story, and that's just part of being a publicist. Something else that can be difficult would be, this is not just for ballet, but when you are trying to get the most interesting tidbits of someone, I alluded to it earlier, but not everyone is right for interviews or for setting up. And I work on the coaching. There's some people that can't be coached. It's just a little awkward. It's just a challenge. And that's just part of it. And you find somebody else. So there's always a silver lining.
Elizabeth, you mentioned you do work in the office most of the time, even though some of your peers might not. So are you able to leave, work in those hours of the 9 to 5, or do you find that you take home some of that work?
Recently, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about a meeting. I would love to leave work at work, but I think that the more you care about something, and also the reality is Americans tie so much of their identity into their professions. So even though I am Elizabeth Sosa Bailey, daughter of Ruth and Jeff, third generation Houstonian, etc., I'm also Houston Ballet's publicist. And so in that regard, it does kind of stick with you, the things you should have said or the things that you wish you'd brought up or how you would have changed something, I'm probably just like any human, just trying to let things go. And it's a good reminder to not take things out of work. But as far as a 9 to 5, I mean, as a publicist or as really anyone in communications,
Mm-hmm.
take the lunch, take the coffee, meet with your peers in the building or at other organizations or completely different fields. I think that that's really important. So, it is good to get out of the office to meet with people.
Yes, to maintain human interaction outside of the office for
Exactly.
sure. Is it a 9 to 5, 8 to 4? Do you have set hours of the day that you're in the office?
It's a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And
Awesome.
then when we're in rep, when we have a production going on, I work 1 or 2 of the dress rehearsals where I work with the photographer to capture images that we end up using for publicity. And then opening night, I'm always there to welcome our media. It's
Yes.
typically a Thursday. And I've been lucky to be connected with Houston First, which is our tourism bureau. And I've been able to host several Mexican FAMs, familiarizations. So journalists coming in from Mexico, and that's usually not on
Awesome.
a opening night. So maybe I'm coming up
Yes.
on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday evening. So it's more than just the 9 to 5, which I think is why it is a little easier to take those long lunches or,
Yes. Makes sense.
be easy on yourself, take grace, and yeah, reps are long weeks, but then there's a calm.
Yes. Okay, so right there and then you're touching on my next question. Do you have a time of year where things are a lot busier? I'm assuming when a new production comes out, that's a busy time.
Yes.
Could you share a little bit about that?
The busiest time is certainly Nutcracker. That's the
Mhm.
cash cow. That's winter. It's over 30 performances. It starts
A lot.
typically the Friday after Thanksgiving, all the way to Christmas and Boxing Day, a day or two after. So that's just a very intense time of shows almost every day. And but also non-Christmas time, non-holiday time, that week up until the opening night is busy as securing last minute interviews and just knowing it's going to be some long days.
Yes.
But yeah, you just take the time the next week to come in a little later, have that flex and grace.
Okay, that's good. So there is that flexibility within the work.
Yes.
Okay.
And you have to do it for yourself. Not everyone's going to remind you to take that time because burnout's very real and you're only as good as your best self. So you need
Yeah.
to take care of yourself. So I remind myself of that all the time.
Agreed. No, that is very important. I always say when your mental health is good, everything around you falls into place a lot better, especially with work. All right. So I have kind of like a combined question for you. What is a thing that you think people tend to underestimate about working in public relations? And what is one thing that they overestimate?
People underestimate how important it is to get that piece of why someone else will care. What I mean is that back work of, I can't just present this ballet. It has to be this dancer who came up this way, this choreographer from a different country, the musician from that is like very young, or that is a lot of work on the back end to make sure that as you're pitching, someone's going to be intrigued about this. As far as overestimating what a publicist can do, I think that people might think that there's an instant coverage, and that's just not always the case. There's an editorial process. Specific writers may be out, or journalists. It's just everything has to fall into place, and it doesn't always. So maybe you didn't get coverage in one specific outlet. It just happens. So I think that overestimation, or that unreasonable expectation that you're going to have every outlet on your wish list. Right.
Got it.
But then you end up having some other random coverage, and that's, it's the little consolation prizes that come along.
Yes. So it's kind of like a balance, and it's working around it and understanding that what may not work out, something else will.
I am admittedly an optimist and try and find those little consolation prizes when I can. So.
Yeah. No, and it's definitely important in your profession and in right about every profession to just stay on the positive side of what a goal is and what an achievement is. Okay, so moving on from that, what would be the fastest way to get into a public relations type of role? Specifically, if you're someone coming from a non-traditional background, how do you get your foot in the door? I know you mentioned you studied sociology, but you did have as well that English minor. That was also a way for sure in the door. But what would you recommend?
For college age, write for your newspaper if you can. I'm also so grateful for mentors in my life. So whether that's a professor or your supervisor in an internship, making your intentions known and clear. And if you're really passionate, people will connect you. And so I believe that you get into, if you think you want to be a publicist, just try and make connections as best you can. Do an internship if you're able to, and meet as many different people as you can in media, in your college, in your like mixers or whatever, where there's something hosted by a magazine or a radio show or TV. Don't underestimate the people that represent a station or a publication, even if they're like the outreach person. If you're engaging with them, they'll want to help you. So being earnest helps.
I agree. And I feel like we always hear the quote of your net worth. No, your network is your net worth. But I feel like that goes even further, because when you meet people and you create those relationships, and if you leave a positive impact on each other, then that takes you so many places and can really open so many doors for mentorship, for learning, for even just friendship. And it's very important.
Yeah.
All right. So Elizabeth, are there specific fields that people are coming from before getting into public relations? Or do you find that it tends to be random?
I feel like there's a lot of journalists that make great publicists, writers. I wrote for my college newspaper, the Daily Cougar at University of Houston. And I was also working at the NPR and PBS affiliate. So I was already kind of thinking in a lens of media outlets. I think it takes a certain kind of person to be a publicist. It's so much more than just writing a release and pitching. At least that's where I find my success, is really going deeper and explaining in the talking points, the shorthand of why this is going to be interesting to your audiences. And for instance, even in my emails, usually it's not really a hi, hope your day is going well.
Yes.
Hey, this is happening, and this is
really exciting.
Cool. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of like, no, and I agree. I think anytime you are reaching out to a person, it's like, hey, here's a value that you can get out of this. This is what you can do to be a part of it. And that definitely has a better response than just, hey, this is great, you should come, you know?
Yeah.
So I love that you shared that. Could you now tell me, what does someone have to be good at specifically to be good at this job? I know you've touched on a few different aspects of that. So we have, you know, be a good storyteller, have the ability to dig deeper into each person and find a way to tell a story that can actually impact a wider audience. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
I've always prided myself as the sort of person that can talk to everyone from the janitor to C-suite level. And so that falls in line, I think, with being approachable, being able to talk to different kinds of people, and also being someone that people can be comfortable with, especially if you are mediating between talent and media outlet, especially if someone's nervous, coach them, pump them up. It's the talent. You make them feel as wonderful and talented as they are, and you can share with the outlet, the writer, the journalists, they're like this, they're from, maybe English is not their first language or whatever. You just transparency, honesty, and being approachable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I know you told me you have been in PR for around 20 years now, if I'm not wrong. And I would love to know, how long do you think it took you to feel like you were really good at the job? And what should people expect regarding that expectation? Because it sounds like it's a field where there's a lot of perfectionism, right? From what you shared, of just having high expectations. So, what would you say? Is it a constantly learning type of field?
Well, my experience might be different in the sense that almost 20 years ago, I started as community engagement. And that's why I feel so strongly about community relations being such an integral part of being a successful publicist. But I'm always learning every day how to write better, how to pitch someone more profoundly, or you have to really get to know these people too, and understand how they like to be pitched to. So I like typically providing media briefs for both talent and the interviewer, so they can have a little bit of background. And I have a writer that I interact with for almost every rep who does not appreciate those. They're old school. They're of a certain way. So the work that I've done here so far is different than, say, the publicity for Cinema Art Society or Allied Integrated Marketing or those food and hospitality. So I feel like I still have a lot to learn. I'm always going to wake up in the middle of the night every once in a while. I should have done it that way, but it's all a learning experience. And all I can do is be earnest about it and trying to do better. And how long would it take for someone to get I don't know, anywhere from a couple years to 20, or I couldn't say. I think that's an individual journey.
Okay, so with right now, you are in public relations, you are a manager in that position. Could you share a bit about what the typical promotion path is like in the industry?
So I mentioned my former director mentor. She was the PR manager for Alley Theater, and then she went on to be the director of communications. And now she works at a college, Sam Houston, and she's she's a very higher up than whatever she was when she was director of communications for an entire university.
Okay.
For a place like Houston Ballet, which is it is its own kind of animal. I mean, my director's been here for over 20 years. So
Yeah.
it is interesting to reflect on. I am what I guess they call an older millennial. I say Gen Y, but I was at Houston Public Media for 7 years. I've been at Houston Ballet for a year and a half. I feel like jobs tend to be somewhere in the middle of that, right? A year to like 7 is almost unheard of. And I do unfortunately believe that people have to not hop around, but seek opportunities when they can for growth. It's not necessarily the way it was for our predecessors, where they grow at one place, at one organization or one company.
Well, and again, working in, a ballet company, I feel just from past experience in dance, there is the specific culture, and that is definitely a factor in even just running the business aspect of it. So I see how that can be different from industry to industry in PR.
It's a large organization. So
Yes.
it's not the same as a nonprofit of a smaller team.
Right.
And ultimately, I do believe that my generation of millennials or whatever, there is an element of moving around, which I don't love it, but that is, that's what I see my peers and my friends have done as well. What are Gen Zs doing? Can you tell yet? Like, how old's the oldest Gen Z?
How old is the oldest Gen Z? Ooh, like 26, 27? Maybe?
So, do you think that they are staying in jobs that long?
I don't think so.
I know. I didn't want to speak on behalf of Gen Z, but I see that. I feel that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a shift in, I
Work
don't know.
culture, for sure.
Perhaps so, yeah. I think I've grown up and right now I work for Job Dictionary. I have another job still. So I've always been kind of like a hard and hustle type of girl, but I don't think that's necessarily for everyone in the generation. So I definitely can see how there's a bit of a divide between, the millennials who currently are holding those management positions and Gen Z, and it might be hard to communicate between the two with the different culture approaching work. We have, a bit of a more personal question, so please feel free to answer it in as wide a range as you would like. But what is an average salary that someone should expect at your level in a position of public relations?
At my level is interesting because I don't have my master's degree, and we're also talking at a time where I'm in my late 30s and I'm thinking about how I feel like I need to do that. It's never too late. That's what I hear. But it's a very real thing to feel like, well, I've been in a professional industry for nearly 20 years. What will get me to that next level?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I am lucky because I do have so much experience. Without that master's, I would, for my level, I think that it would be 50 to 80.
Do you believe that, because I know you were mentioning, getting a master's, do you think that having that extra education is something that can add a factor to increase that salary as you go on in the professional career?
I do. This goes back to another question about the career path. So I feel that there's no mastering. It doesn't matter. An executive director doesn't have everything mastered. We're always going to be learning. But there is a certain point where I've done X, Y, and Z. I feel very proud of this work. I'm ready for a new challenge. What is the next step, director of communications, or and I do at this point for this kind of work, I think the higher education is important.
Okay.
Rats. I'd really been trying to avoid it for this long, and
Hey.
there are absolutely people, but they're my age or older, and I think
Okay.
that as we're thinking about the next generation who really likes telling stories for outlets,
Yes.
it's important to think of that sooner than I did.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. So if someone in a publicist, public relation role wanted to move on from the field, what kind of work do you find that they happen to go into next? Is there any themes, or do they just kind of go into anything?
Kind of like I've run into a lot of publicists that used to be writers. I think that a lot of publicists may also go on to write for publications, freelance. I know a lot of, it's funny, I know multiple people that used to be publicists for major arts organizations in Houston, and now they have their day job at a hospital or a bank, and then because they miss art so much and are passionate about that, they just freelance on the side because they still need to nurture that part of what gives them life, I guess.
Yes.
And I think when I try and think of people that move on from PR, I think you're always going to be a people person connector. So it's just like whatever somebody really likes to do. That could be anything.
Okay. So it could be right about anything. I mean, happens to be good people who can communicate. You know, they have that quality of like the ability to storytell. So probably anything that might lead that way, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly.
All right. So we are actually reaching kind of the final few questions of the interview, Elizabeth. So are there any books, resources, podcasts, certifications, anything you would recommend to the younger generation that might be wanting to get into this profession?
That's the best question. I would say, as far as programs and resources, it's find what you are interested in. So, like, as it came into the ballet, I started listening to a podcast called Turning Point, and it really helped me understand the culture of dancers in a way that no one in the building that my colleagues weren't able to explain. It was really hearing it from them. So what I mean is, when you're going into a role as a publicist for whatever the field is, learn as much about that field to really grasp. Does that make sense? So I mean, in that case, it was the ballet, but like if you're a publicist for food and hospitality, learn as much as you can about what restaurant culture is like, and farm to table, or whatever the processes that make a dining experience unique, or a publicist for an oil company, understanding crisis management and what's happening in our climate, and things like this.
Yes. All right. Okay, awesome. Perfect. Okay, so Elizabeth, could you tell me what is one thing? I know you mentioned continuing education, but if you had to give yourself a piece of advice to your younger self at the beginning of your career, what would that be?
I'm just going to be totally honest. And so I stayed at the NPR and PBS affiliate for 7 years, which felt like a long time. I would have left a few years earlier. We're talking about this correlation between generations of moving around. I do believe that that people grow as they
Mm-hmm.
find new challenges. Again, you're never going to master anything, but don't let yourself get complacent. So I wish that I had told myself that there's more opportunities, and always be curious, and always don't close any doors. Be open.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a great piece of advice. Always, that's going to resonate with this generation, I will tell you this. But definitely has been great today to just hear everything you have to share about this specific industry. I loved getting to speak with you today. Could you tell me where can people reach out to you or follow along what you're up to at work?
Absolutely. I keep up the Houston Ballet in the news pages so you can see what publicity we have. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, artist formerly known as Twitter at Elsoba or Elizabeth Sosa Daily. And I love LinkedIn. It's kind of dorky, but I actually got this job through LinkedIn. It's really easy to connect with people
It is.
that way.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Elizabeth. Again, speaking with you is always a joy. I love to hear, one, the passion you have for what you do. And also, I think you are someone who truly gives great advice. I don't know how to explain that any better, but even in our conversations we had prior to this interview, what you have to share is always very valuable. So thank you for that and appreciate you for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we can better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!